On Friday, June 1, 2018, at approximately 7:00 a.m., an amateur photographer and hiking enthusiast named Marcus was exploring the arid terrain of Joshua Tree National Park in southeastern California. As he strayed from the main trail, he observed a large flock of vultures scavenging over an object. Assuming it to be the carcass of a sizable animal, he opted to maintain a safe distance. Armed with a compact camera typically used for landscape photography, Marcus decided to document the scene of the birds circling in the desolate desert. After capturing several images, he continued his hike, momentarily dismissing the unusual sight. The following day, while transferring the photos to their home computer, Marcus shared the details of his hike with his wife. As she reviewed the images, her expression shifted dramatically. She called Marcus over and pointed to one of the photos. Upon closer inspection, it became unsettlingly apparent that something resembling a human leg was partially buried in the sand beneath the vultures. Disturbed by this discovery, the couple promptly contacted local authorities to report their findings. Marcus provided all the photographs and detailed the exact location where he had observed the birds. The area, situated near one of the park's major roads, was relatively easy for investigators to locate. What began as a routine observation quickly escalated into one of the most intricate and astonishing criminal investigations in recent years. Approximately 30 feet from the roadside, a congregation of vultures and a pair of coyotes starkly contrasted with the barren desert landscape. It was particularly unusual to witness coyotes scavenging in broad daylight, which immediately raised suspicions. Officers, harboring suspicions, pulled their vehicle to the roadside, exited, and approached the scene. There, they discovered a shallow grave, hastily excavated in the arid soil, measuring less than 2 feet in depth. Local wildlife had already disturbed the area, revealing its grim contents. Upon the arrival of forensic specialists to exhume the remains, it became evident that this was not a natural occurrence. The remains belonged to a middle-aged white male, estimated to have been interred for approximately 1 week. The body had been partially unearthed, with the lower half closer to the surface, allowing scavengers access. Several gruesome injuries were apparent. The man's skull exhibited multiple fractures consistent with impacts from a heavy blunt object. The scene depicted a distressing narrative of a violent and intentional act. Given the grave's proximity to the road and its hurried excavation, it was clear that the perpetrator had acted swiftly. Had they ventured further into the desert and dug a deeper hole, the body might have remained concealed for years. Instead, they opted for a hasty concealment of the crime and departed the scene carelessly. Forensic analysis suggested that the crime likely took place elsewhere, as the grave contained minimal blood traces despite the extensive injuries, indicating that the body had been moved post-mortem. This led investigators to the unsettling conclusion that the crime was, at least in part, premeditated. However, despite the apparent urgency of the perpetrator, no clear clues or evidence were left for investigators to pursue. The medical examiner concluded that the cause of death was severe blunt force trauma. The intensity of the blows indicated a deeply personal motive, with the assailant exhibiting extreme aggression. Investigators theorized that the crime was driven by animosity or a personal vendetta. However, the victim's identity and the circumstances surrounding his death remained unclear. Despite the body being in a state of decomposition and having been disturbed by scavenging wildlife, investigators successfully retrieved several fingerprints from the remains. When these prints were compared against a criminal database, they returned no matches, indicating that the victim had no prior legal issues. However, upon uploading the prints to the Department of Motor Vehicles database, investigators were able to identify the victim as Henry Stang, a 54-year-old resident of Marietta, a suburban city in Riverside County, California. Henry's home was located approximately 90 miles from where his body was found, prompting investigators to visit his residence in search of answers regarding the tragic circumstances of his death in the remote wilderness of Joshua Tree. Henry Stang lived alone in a home that mirrored his solitary existence, characterized by a disorganized bachelor pad. Personal items were strewn about, and empty pizza boxes and takeout containers cluttered the countertops. The residence lacked the warmth typically associated with a lived-in space, yet there were no indications of forced entry, theft, or a struggle. It was evident that whatever transpired with Henry had taken place elsewhere. The most disturbing discovery awaited investigators in the garage attached to the house. which was likely the scene of significant events. The crime scene presented a harrowing narrative, with dried blood spatter marring the walls and various tools and storage boxes strewn across the floor. A substantial pool of congealed blood lay on the ground, partially smeared, indicating an attempt to clean the area that had been hastily abandoned. In one corner of the garage, a collection of blood-soaked rags, heavily treated with bleach, was found alongside an empty bottle carelessly discarded nearby. Near the entrance to the house, investigators discovered what seemed to be the weapon used in the crime, a heavy dumbbell marked with dried blood. Overhead, dangling wires suggested that a surveillance camera had been forcibly removed. A thorough examination of the residence uncovered additional cameras, one located in the living room and another in the hallway, both also torn from their positions. The individual responsible for this brutal act appeared to possess knowledge of the camera locations and had deliberately removed them to eliminate potential evidence. Regrettably, the perpetrator left minimal clues for investigators. There were no foreign fingerprints, no shoe prints, and no blood or DNA traces from anyone other than Henry. The scene appeared to be meticulously cleaned, leaving detectives with more questions than answers. Henry had no known legal issues, was divorced, lived alone, and seemed to have no apparent adversaries. Neighbors characterized him as a quiet and amiable individual, someone who generally kept to himself but was always courteous. However, the extreme violence of the crime raised significant questions. Who could commit such a savage act? Was it someone from Henry's past, or was it related to his peculiar hobbies? Most concerning of all was the fact that no one had reported him missing in a timely manner. Henry had grown up in a. Henry belonged to a close-knit family that prioritized respect and strong relationships. His mother and two younger sisters resided in a nearby town, and the family maintained regular communication through phone calls and occasional visits. However, in recent months, Henry had become increasingly withdrawn, speaking less with his family and keeping personal matters private. His loved ones expressed concern but chose not to overreact when he did not reach out for about a week. As their worry grew, they decided to hold off on raising an alarm. The news of Henry's tragic death was a devastating blow to his mother and sisters, who were left in shock and heartache. They promptly collaborated with investigators, providing any information that might assist in solving the case. Once a vibrant and athletic individual, Henry had a passion for outdoor adventures, including hiking, traveling, and enjoying nature. He was also a skilled guitarist and a motorsport enthusiast, with his motorcycle being a treasured possession that had taken him across several states. However, everything changed in the spring of 2014. One day, as Henry was preparing for a ride, his motorcycle was struck by a pickup truck driven by an intoxicated individual. The collision was catastrophic, with the driver dragging Henry nearly 300 feet before coming to a halt. Remarkably, Henry survived, but the injuries he sustained were life-altering. The accident resulted in severe damage to his legs, necessitating multiple major surgeries. He faced months of arduous rehabilitation to regain the ability to walk, yet the physical pain continued to linger. Medication provided no relief, prompting doctors to prescribe potent painkillers to manage his condition. However, this quickly resulted in dependency, which escalated into a debilitating addiction. At the time of the accident, Henry had been married for over 10 years, and he and his wife were raising 2 children together. Initially, his wife supported him through his recovery and growing reliance on medication, but the pressure became overwhelming. By 2016, she filed for divorce, taking their children and relocating to a nearby town to be closer to her family. Despite the separation, she maintained a cordial relationship with Henry, allowing him to remain involved in their children's lives. Following the accident, Henry's physical limitations forced him to give up many of his former hobbies. He redirected his focus towards his passion for technology and electronics, dedicating much of his time to tinkering with gadgets and equipment. He transformed one room in his home into a fully equipped radio studio, from which he launched a podcast. This platform allowed him to discuss current events and share his often candid and unfiltered opinions. Henry's broadcasts became a daily ritual where he expressed his thoughts openly, often exploring philosophical ideas or making bold statements on controversial subjects. The absence of censorship on his show attracted a dedicated audience, garnering him both loyal supporters and passionate critics. Some listeners, particularly those who opposed his views, began to provoke him intentionally, goading him into emotional outbursts, which were subsequently recorded and shared. In an online community dedicated to amateur radio enthusiasts, recordings of Henry were frequently shared on social media, often manipulated to portray him unfavorably. Investigators discovered a particularly aggressive individual who appeared to harbor a significant resentment towards Henry. This person routinely insulted him and disseminated edited segments of his broadcasts, harshly critiquing his remarks. However, a deeper examination revealed that this individual's behavior extended beyond just targeting Henry. They had a pattern of attacking various members of the community, using the platform as a means to belittle and harass others for amusement. While their hostility towards Henry was apparent, it remained uncertain whether this online aggression was linked to the crime that occurred in late January 2018. Just 4 months prior to the tragic event, Henry Stang endured a frightening incident when, according to his family, an intruder broke into his home during the night while he was asleep. The assailant entered through a window and assaulted Henry with a hammer, striking him multiple times on the head. Notably, nothing was stolen from the residence, indicating that the motive was not theft but likely a personal vendetta. The attacker not only brought the hammer but also took it upon leaving. Surprisingly, Henry chose not to report this incident to law enforcement. Instead, he opted to install hidden surveillance cameras throughout his home. The individual who later entered his residence appeared to be aware of these cameras and their implications. As investigators reconstructed the events leading up to Henry's demise, they discovered that his last known podcast had been broadcast shortly before the incident. On the evening of Thursday, May 24, 2018, there were no records of any outgoing or incoming calls, text messages, or activity related to his utilities, as neither water nor electricity had been utilized since that night. This led investigators to conclude that this was the day Henry's life came to an end. Detectives initiated their investigation by interviewing individuals closest to Henry and discovered that his divorce proceedings were still ongoing. Despite efforts to maintain civility for the sake of their 2 children, the couple was embroiled in a contentious legal battle over the house where Henry resided following their separation. Meanwhile, his ex-wife and their children had moved in with her mother, which further intensified the situation. It was revealed that Henry's ex-wife had been covering the utility bills for the house after an accident rendered him unable to work. He relied on a modest disability allowance, which was insufficient for his full support. Despite their separation, she continued to provide him with financial assistance. Neighbors reported that Henry's ex-wife would visit him periodically, likely in an effort to resolve their property dispute. However, these visits frequently escalated into loud arguments, with their disputes audible throughout the neighborhood. This discord raised a significant question: could the mother of Henry's children have been so desperate to settle their conflict over the house that she resorted to extreme measures? At this juncture in the investigation, Henry's ex-wife emerged as the primary suspect. Detectives brought her in for questioning, during which she provided a somber account of their relationship. Henry's ex-wife stated that their marriage had once been characterized by happiness and stability. However, everything shifted following Henry's motorcycle accident. She dedicated herself to assisting him in his recovery and adaptation to his new circumstances, yet the prolonged use of prescription medications transformed his personality, rendering him increasingly challenging to coexist with. Ultimately, she felt compelled to leave the relationship. Despite their separation, she continued to provide support by covering his expenses and ensuring he had stable housing. Her unwavering loyalty and financial assistance complicated the investigators' ability to ascertain whether she could be responsible for such a grievous act. Consequently, detectives were required to delve deeper into the case. While Henry's ex-wife remained a person of interest, her narrative presented a more intricate scenario that warranted further scrutiny of Henry's troubled relationships and underlying tensions. Initially, she sought an amicable resolution to their property disagreements. However, the situation escalated dramatically when Henry introduced a young girlfriend into his life. He declared his intention to reside in the house with his new partner, a statement that sparked significant conflict. Overwhelmed by his infatuation, Henry seemed to disregard the needs of his children entirely. Despite their differences, Henry's ex-wife exhibited no clear motive to harm him. Rather, she conveyed sympathy for her former husband. Furthermore, she possessed a strong alibi for the day investigators believed the crime occurred, as she was on a week-long business trip in another state. With her cleared of suspicion, detectives shifted their focus to the enigmatic circumstances surrounding the case. A young woman named Ashley, who was in her early 20s, had captured Henry's affection. Approximately 10 months prior to his passing, Henry's mother disclosed that her son had begun a relationship with Ashley. Neither she nor Henry's sisters approved of this union, finding Ashley's behavior peculiar and her intentions ambiguous, particularly given Henry's age, disability, and dependence on a modest disability allowance. It was difficult to comprehend what had attracted the young college student to him. Although Ashley did not seem to be financially motivated, it was clear that she had her own reasons for sustaining the relationship. The romance advanced swiftly, prompting concerns from Henry's family, who attempted to caution him about potential dangers. Nevertheless, Henry dismissed their worries, confidently asserting that Ashley was his ideal partner. A neighbor provided further insight, noting that Ashley frequently visited Henry's residence and that they had engaged in conversation on multiple occasions. The neighbor specifically remembered Ashley driving a distinctive blue Chevrolet with a significant dent on the rear passenger door. On the day the police searched Henry's home, Ashley was seen again. Witnesses reported observing her slowly drive past the house, seemingly monitoring the situation from a distance before hastily leaving without stopping. Her actions raised suspicions. If she had noticed Henry's absence for a week and then saw police at his residence, why did she not inquire about the situation? Her behavior appeared questionable, and investigators were keen to speak with her as detectives continued their inquiry. Ashley's social media profile unveiled a surprising twist. Her public photos and posts made no reference to Henry. Instead, she appeared to be in a serious relationship with another man, a young and fit U.S. Marine. This individual was identified as Curtis Kruger, a 30-year-old lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. Images of the couple together depicted them in affectionate embraces and smiling, with no signs of Ashley's connection to Henry. This revelation hinted at a complex web of secrets and deception, prompting critical inquiries into Ashley's true motives and the dynamics of her relationships with both men. Investigators were tasked with determining whether the tumultuous circumstances of this concealed love triangle had contributed to the violent crime that claimed Henry's life. Curtis Kruger's military obligations required him to be frequently on the move, spending the majority of his time on base, which limited his opportunities to see Ashley. Their relationship primarily consisted of weekend visits, which were not always assured. When they did manage to meet, they often took trips out of town to enjoy private moments together. Occasionally, Ashley would visit Curtis on base during family days and other military events, seamlessly integrating into his world. The couple had even begun making wedding plans, with Curtis often expressing that Ashley was the woman of his dreams, someone he never wished to lose. However, doubts persisted in his mind. He confided in his sister about Ashley's frequent absences, her reluctance to answer his calls, and her lack of explanations for her disappearances. Growing suspicious, Curtis decided to install tracking software. Curtis utilized software on Ashley's phone to track her movements, which quickly led him to the truth. He confronted Ashley at a gas station located near Henry Stang's residence. Under pressure, she confessed to where she had been spending her time and even provided Curtis with the address. However, she denied any infidelity, instead revealing a troubling secret. Ashley explained that a hip injury she had suffered years prior had resulted in her dependence on potent painkillers. She further disclosed that Henry, who was also struggling with a similar addiction, had been attempting to reduce his intake. This effort had left him with an excess of medication, which Ashley had been consuming. She alleged that Henry coerced her into providing something in exchange for the drugs and accused him of abusive behavior. Angered by her revelations, Curtis took drastic action. Armed with a hammer, he entered Henry's home on a frigid January night and attacked him while he slept. Curtis believed he had killed Henry and later confessed his actions to his sister, who would become a crucial witness. Unbeknownst to Curtis, Henry survived the assault and chose not to report the incident to the authorities, mistakenly believing the attack was linked to his outspoken podcasting endeavors. He remained unaware that his girlfriend's secret life placed both Curtis and Ashley at the center of the investigation. Detectives encountered difficulties, as they lacked adequate evidence for an arrest, and both suspects could have invoked their right to remain silent and requested legal counsel, potentially hindering the investigation. The police formulated an astute strategy to catch the duo unawares, setting a trap that would ultimately reveal the truth. Initially, the authorities secured a court order to monitor the phone conversations of Curtis and Ashley. Subsequently, officers approached Ashley's brother, presenting him with a photograph of her alongside Henry, inquiring if he recognized anyone in the image. He promptly identified his sister but stated that he did not know the man beside her. The officers informed him that they were investigating a serious crime and needed to ascertain the identity of the individual in the photograph. They requested that he send the picture to Ashley and attempt to gather more information. Ashley's response was swift. She called her brother, asserting that she had no knowledge of the man or any details regarding a crime. Shortly thereafter, Ashley contacted Curtis in a state of panic. During their emotional exchange, she conveyed that the police had somehow linked her to the investigation. Both suspects expressed bewilderment over how this connection had been made, confident that they had successfully concealed their actions by removing the cameras and disposing of the body in the desert. While they refrained from using explicit language about the crime, their conversation included specific details that only someone involved in the events would know. On the same day, both Curtis and Ashley were arrested and taken to the station for separate questioning. Curtis immediately declined to speak and requested legal representation. In contrast, Ashley was confronted with the recording of her conversation with Curtis. Realizing that she could not deny her involvement, she began to make a confession. Initially, her statements were inconsistent and lacked clarity. Ashley acknowledged her presence at the crime scene on the night of the attack but asserted that she did not witness the assailant. Initially, she reported that an intruder had entered the residence, prompting Henry to investigate, only to be ambushed in the garage. However, when detectives presented evidence indicating that both her and Curtis's phones were traced to Henry's home that night, Ashley's narrative changed. She confessed to being romantically involved with both men for nearly 10 months. After Curtis discovered her relationship with Henry, he chose to confront him. Ashley revealed that following an altercation in January, during which Curtis severely injured Henry, he assumed that Ashley would distance herself from Henry. However, upon learning that she continued to see Henry, Curtis became furious. On the night of the crime, he drove to Henry's residence and attacked him once more. Ashley admitted to assisting Curtis in concealing the crime. She disclosed that she had pointed out the locations of Henry's surveillance cameras, aided in their removal, and helped hide Henry's body in the desert. Ultimately, she revealed the whereabouts of the hammer that Curtis had used during the initial attack in January. This weapon, when recovered, bore traces of both Henry's blood and Curtis's fingerprints, serving as crucial evidence in the case. The trial of Curtis Kruger and Ashley Stapp commenced in August 2020. Curtis maintained his innocence, asserting that he was defending his fiancée's honor. His attorney contended that Ashley was the true instigator, leading a double life and manipulating both men for her own gain. The defense also emphasized,